You found it. It's The Real News with your host, David Knight.
Welcome on this Thursday, the first day of February 2018. I'm David Knight. Today we're going to have as guests in studio some individuals who have been working on a documentary on transhumanism, and they are coming to Austin for a transhumanist conference, and they like the idea. So we're going to talk to them about the nature of technology, of government, and of man and God, because that's the fundamental issues that are here. Will we become God? Will we have eternal life through technology? Yeah, technology is our God now, isn't it? We're going to talk about that with them when they get here. There's also the first thing we're going to hit today. In the next segment, we're going to talk about what's going on with the memo. We had a couple of FBI agents contact Fox News and said, yeah, there's a lot of people in the FBI that want to see this discussed, that want to have this out. And people are not just talking about this off the record. They're going on the news and talking about it, former officials with the FBI, but also current officials with the FBI, because they'd like to clear the air. They'd like to get their reputation back. And nevertheless, you still have individuals like Christopher Wray and Rod Rosenstein, who we understand features prominently in the memo, Rosenstein does, saying that they think this is a very bad idea. They have looked at this and they've decided that they've done everything exactly right. And they don't want anybody questioning this because it undermines their authority. Yes, I think it will. I think it will. I think that's a good thing. I think we should never get to the point where we just unquestionably trust the government. That is not the American tradition. I'll tell you what Patrick Henry said about that when we come back. You cannot have a free country if you hide the transactions of the government from its people. If you don't have transparency, you don't have a republic. You don't even have an operational democracy, let alone a republic. So it has to come out. And now we've got Adam Schiff out there saying we've got to we got a memo of our own we want to put out there. And they changed this memo on us. They made a change on it. So we'll talk about what those changes were. And again, it's another example of why the memo needs to get out. Very important to have that memo get out for the American people to see what is being done at their expense, both at the expense of their taxes and the expense of their rights and their liberties. The biggest thing coming out with this, and we got a clip of Rand Paul going on with Stephen Colbert. And Rand Paul was making some great points, and Stephen Colbert cut him off and goes to break. And so we're gonna play that back and forth. Rand Paul understands what the issue is here. And there's some good news coming out of Idaho, because there is a bipartisan effort there at the state level to shut down the NDAA indefinite detention. Do you remember that? Remember that? It was something that came up in 2012. It was something that Obama said, don't worry, I'm not going to sign it. It was something that was slipped into the funding bill, the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act. They do one every year to fund the military. And they love to slip in really nasty stuff in there, things that have absolutely nothing to do with funding the military, or things that completely subvert our Constitution and our individual liberties. And the indefinite detention bill was one of those. And after Obama said, don't worry, I'm not going to sign it, then on New Year's Eve, when nobody is paying any attention, he signs it. Well, we've been paying attention. And a lot of individual local governments within Idaho have said, you know what, we are not going to recognize that. Sorry, it has absolutely no authority, and it will not be recognized. And now, unanimously in their House, and it's had bipartisan support, Democrats and Republicans. The Democrat co-sponsor is actually running for governor of Idaho. This is not a Republican Democrat issue. This is a tyranny liberty issue, and they get it in Idaho. We're going to tell you more about that when we come back. It's about nullification. That's the rightful remedy. I'm David Knight. We'll be right back. Well, it's the first day of February 2018. A lot of news has broken the last 24 hours, and it is centering around the memo. And before we get into that, and some of the things that are coming up, we have a nullification bill. Nullification of an incredible act of tyranny that was bipartisan, quite frankly. It was Obama who did it, but it was also people like Lindsey Graham saying, shut up, you don't get a lawyer. No, what you get is indefinite detention by the military without even being charged with a crime. Yeah, you'd think that that could never happen. Well, it already has. Go back to World War II and look at the Japanese people that were rounded up as we declared war against Japan. Japanese Americans who've been here for quite a while. They were rounded up and detained indefinitely without trial, without even an accusation. Look at your property, Republicans. You understand that you should be understanding private property rights. I mean, Republicans seem to understand private property rights a lot more than Democrats do, but they look the other way when it comes to the war on drugs. They can pretend that they have the authority and they can call it civil asset forfeiture. And by calling it civil, they say, well, we're not going to say that it's criminal because this is something that was created by bureaucracy. It's a rule. It's not a law. And so because it's a rule created by a bureaucracy that is unelected and not representative of you, and you can't get rid of these people, it's totally unaccountable to you. But because that unelected, unaccountable bureaucracy creates a rule, that it is not a law. And so therefore you don't have the protections of the Bill of Rights to have a trial, to have a public accusations, to see what's going on, to be convicted before you are penalized, or the protections against excessive fines. So they say none of that applies. We're going to call it a civil asset forfeiture. We're not fining you. We're not stealing your stuff. We're not taking your stuff. You're forfeiting it. Forfeiting it. Yeah, it's all in the language, isn't it? It's kind of like George Carlin when he was talking about baseball versus football. Now, baseball, you have a sacrifice. You go home. You play it on a diamond, right? And in the NFL and football, you had the blitz. You had the gridiron. You touchdown, all that kind of stuff. You tackle people, all that language. So they say it's a forfeiture. We're not taking it. You're forfeiting it. And it's civil. It's not civil at all. It's criminal what they're doing. But getting back to the NDAA and the things that Obama did during his administration, look at the fact that using the 1917 Espionage Act, he put more whistleblowers and journalists in jail than every other president combined over the previous 100 years. Look at the fact that he used the Antiquities Act that was about the same age as that act to steal hundreds of millions of acres of land for the federal government to say that they had ownership of that land, when the Constitution says they don't own anything except the little bit of Washington, D.C., and what they need for forts and ports and that sort of thing. Not massive amounts of land like that. And to call them to use an act that was set up to protect Indian artifacts that had been used to protect Devil's Tower, just a couple hundred acres around Devil's Tower. Now, he took hundreds of millions of acres of land. And we know what was up with that. We know that this was a Uranium One type of thing, Agenda 21 type of thing. They want to take the assets, as we saw John McCain being involved with in Arizona, taking a massive Tonto National Forest, taking something that was a national park. They say, hey, we want to put this in as a national park. Well, that's not really their purpose, because they're more than willing to sacrifice a national park, sacrifice something that was part of Indian heritage, something that had significant historical importance, and turn it into a massive crater for a foreign corporation to mine. Yeah, that's why they're so aggressive about taking hundreds of millions of acres of land for the federal government. So we understand where these abuses are coming from. Obama with his Paris Climate Treaty, that since he couldn't get the government, the Senate to ratify the treaty, he said, well, I'll just ratify it myself. I'll just sign it myself. I'll put us in the treaty. No, that's nowhere in the Constitution. Just as it's nowhere in the Constitution to be able to self-fund Obamacare subsidies. That was supposed to be appropriated by the Congress. And when they didn't give him the money, he said, well, I'll just steal the money from Fannie and Freddie investors who have supposedly government-backed mortgages that had turned profitable, so he just stole the money from them. Even while the Congress had sued Obama and won in court, the judge saying, you cannot just take money. It has to be appropriated by the Congress. Well, we'll appeal that, and meanwhile, we'll continue to steal the money so I can fund my socialist takeover of health care. This is why it was so important to get President Trump in, to overturn these unconstitutional, tyrannical actions that Obama had done, the abuse of the law. And there's a lot of cynical abuse of the law. So we want to talk about what's going on with this FISA memo. And this is all coming to a head. It's going to be released very soon, says John Kelly. It says it's coming pretty quickly. Yesterday, we had, let's play that clip of President Trump as he was walking out. He had a GOP representative shake his hand and said, release the memo, President Trump. And President Trump said this.
Great speaking, Let's release the memo. Oh, yeah. Oh, don't worry. 100%. Can you imagine? Yes, sir.
All right, you heard that. He says to him, release the memo. And he goes, don't worry, 100%, 100%. And so John Kelly says, yeah, it's going to happen pretty quickly. So now there's a lot of people panicking in the FBI, the Department of Justice, and the Democrat Party because it's going to expose something that they did. And this takes us back to the foundation of our country, Patrick Henry, as they were debating whether or not they should get into the Constitution or whether they should have the Constitution create a stronger federal government or whether they should continue under the Articles of Confederation. And he famously said, the liberties of a people never were nor ever will be secure when the transactions of their rulers may be concealed from them. Think about the world that we live in today. Everything that the government does is concealed from us because we're not allowed to know. You see, there's two classes of people. There are the rulers and you, the serfs, who are not allowed to even know what these people are doing. Everything is secret, everything. It used to just be the CIA. Now it's everything. You try to be a reporter. Try to go down and talk to anybody, even at City Hall, about, can't tell you that. Sorry, can't tell you anything. So Patrick Henry said, when the transactions of their rulers are concealed from them, the liberties of the people will never be safe. The most iniquitous plots may be carried on against their liberty and happiness. He says, I'm not an advocate for divulging indiscriminately all the operations of government, though the practice of our ancestors in some degree justifies that, because we have seen how our ancestors have been abused by people in power. So maybe we should put all this out, but it could be justified, but I'm not advocating for that at the moment, he said. That's why we have WikiLeaks. Such transactions as relate to military operations or affairs of great consequence, the immediate promulgation of which might defeat the interests of the community, I would not wish to be published until the end, which required their secrecy, should have been effected. But to cover with the veil of secrecy the common routine of business is an abomination in the eyes of every intelligent man and every friend to his country. And he was absolutely right. So let's go from Patrick Henry to NPR. Move forward. What you need to know, says NPR, what you need to know about the GOP snooping memo, because the government press secretary, can you imagine what Patrick Henry would have said about a government-operated press? NPR. So they come, and it's just very simplistic. They're little talking points here. Some of these things. So, well, what evidence is there that these FBI investigators were biased? And say, well, they were investigating Hillary Clinton's use of private email, secretary, but that's a whole separate controversy, and the Justice Department's Inspector General is looking into it. Yeah, it's called criminal obstruction by Andrew McCabe and others. But it gets better. We're going to tell you what NPR thinks you should know about your government, which isn't really very much. This is a real elementary primer. I'm David Knight. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm David Knight. I want to take a look first at what's going on back and forth with the memo. There's been a lot of developments in the last 24 hours. It will be released, but I think as we look at these developments and the hand-wringing and protests of people like Adam Schiff and the other people involved in this, who are basically not wanting this information to come out for personal reasons, and we will see why. These personal reasons are being used to cover this up. But we're also going to be talking in the third hour to an individual who is here with doing a documentary and going to a transhumanist meeting here in Austin. So we're going to talk to him about transhumanism, about the nature of God and men who want to become God and live eternally. So we'll be talking about that in the third hour. And we've also got some amazing news coming out of Las Vegas something in Hawaii that really should scare the people there about missiles coming in, and a bill nullifying Obama's NDAA indefinite detention that he put in 2012. And Idaho is standing up and saying that law will never be enforced here against Iowans. It's unconstitutional, and we're nullifying it. And that's the rightful way to go about this. But we had just started talking about NPR. After talking about Patrick Henry and saying, you'll never have liberty if what your rulers are doing is concealed from you in every regard. And they were doing it at the time they were debating how they were going to put the Constitution together, if they were going to have a Constitution to replace the Articles of Confederation. So the Constitution's got a lot of problems in it, frankly, structural. And if without the Bill of Rights, it isn't worth the paper it's written on. But it's the Bill of Rights that they have completely destroyed. You know, it is a structure. You have to have a blueprint, a structure for government, but part of it was to consolidate power. And so the Virginians, who understood what was going on, people like Patrick Henry, people like James Madison, made sure that we had the Bill of Rights. And key amongst the Bill of Rights is the 10th Amendment, which is what the people in Idaho are saying. Sorry, that trumps all that other stuff that came before it, that was in the main body. Yeah, we just clarified that with the 9th and 10th Amendment. And now they're beginning to clarify it in reality. Because if you don't enforce the Constitution, it's simply a piece of paper. So NPR comes out and tells the low information liberals what all this memo stuff is about. What memo, what are they talking about, this release the memo? Wasn't that something that came out of Russia with some robots or something? The Deplorabots? So in order to bring the liberals up to speed on something that's about to be released, because they don't want to be caught totally covering this up. So they're going to pretend, NPR will, that they're covering this. So they have some stuff here. Oh, you know, it's a whole separate controversy about Hillary Clinton. As part of this process, we're looking at the Russian interference in our elections. They say investigators discovered that an FBI lawyer and a senior investigator sent text messages to each other that criticized Trump, who was then a candidate. I mean, this is the level of primary pablum that NPR is putting out there to their people. I look at this, are you kidding me? These people are so uninformed because they listen to NPR. They go on to say the Inspector General's report also might find fault with Andrew McCabe. You think? After Christopher Wray looked at it, Andrew McCabe was gone the next day. It isn't really clear yet, they said, says NPR, what information it might contain about him. Well, let's tell you, NPR listeners. It's about him falsifying reports. It's about telling subordinates, hey, you know those reports, those interviews you did? Change that. That's called criminal obstruction. Criminal obstruction. Let's look that up for the NPR listeners and readers. Number 4. Well, okay, so he's very critical of President Trump as a candidate. So they ask, are insulting texts about the president against the rules? No, but criminal conspiracy is, bias is very important. The fact that it shows that they have bias, that it shows that they were obstructing the rule, shows that they wanted in it, they hated Trump as a candidate, and they said, we're going to have an insurance policy to take him out in case the unthinkable happens and he actually gets elected. I can't even believe that people elect this guy, but if he does, we're going to take him out here at the FBI. Yeah, that's what's going on that they don't want to tell you about. Then they go on and say, well, what did the FBI and Justice Department say about this? And they said, well, the Justice Department and the FBI say they didn't do anything wrong. Every criminal always says that, don't they? I mean, anybody in law enforcement knows that every criminal says, I didn't do it. So, of course, if they investigate themselves and find that they did nothing wrong, NPR will report it and just leave it there. Just leave it there. And then they go on to say the basis of Nunes's case may be that the FBI acted wrongly by not telling the FISA judge that some of the evidence it was presenting had been financed by Democrats. And then they say under the quote-unquote bias storyline, oh, it's a bias storyline. Yeah, bias story. That tells you how wide the bias is, doesn't it? The bias extends far beyond these individuals at the top of the FBI and the Department of Justice under Barack Obama. It extends to other government agencies like NPR. And so they say, what are the grave concerns? Because that was the phrase that's being bandied about by the media now. The FBI came out and said, we have grave concerns, gravitas about this. What are these grave concerns of the FBI? Is it a big deal for the Bureau and Justice to publicly tell the president, whom they work for, that they disagree with him? Clearly, Trump is in the wrong, according to NPR here. They say critics on the outside also warned about the damage they said all this mudslinging has done to the underlying institutions, because it is the institutions that are important, not your liberties, not your rights, not the law. It's the institutions that must be preserved above all else, according to the institutions like NPR, the FBI, the DOJ, including federal law enforcement and congressional oversight, they say. And then they quote Attorney General Eric Holder, who says, it uses normally protected material, and it puts at risk our intel capabilities in order to derail a legitimate criminal investigation. This is unheard of. It is dangerous. It is irresponsible. You know, what about constitutional protections of liberty, of rights, of prohibitions, of actions that the government just ignores and does whatever they feel like? And then keeping you in the dark, concealing it all from you in perpetuity. And so Rand Paul went on Stephen Colbert's show last night and tried to explain this to him. Let's play that clip, video one.
I'm concerned that we've given too much power to a prosecutor. He was supposed to go after Russian collusion. So far, he's gotten someone over. He recorded General Flynn's phone call and then got him to say something inconsistent with what was recorded in the phone call. Think about it from a personal perspective. If I had 1,000 phone calls from Stephen Colbert, what I could learn, and then if I can interview you, and if you say anything inconsistent with what you said on your private phone calls, I can put you in jail.
Well, if what I said in the private phone call was that, yeah, I met with the Russians over sanctions, and then you asked me, did you meet with the Russians over sanctions, and say no, then lock me up.
All right. He doesn't understand where that's going. We're going to play that again for you when we come back, because Stephen Colbert, who thinks that Donald Trump is a tyrant, doesn't realize that if you give these kinds of powers to a tyrant, they can ask you what your favorite color is and then lock you up for lying about that. That's the power that he wants to pretend hasn't been given to the federal government with these abusive powers. We'll be right back. I'm David Knight. Welcome back. We're going to talk about the clowns on the left and the jokers on the right. You know, Rand Paul is a little bit too polite to point out the fact directly. He said, well, it's kind of ironic, isn't it, that after all of this abuse that we've learned about the surveillance state, about the NSA, about the FISA court, isn't it kind of ironic that the very next day after they reauthorized it and loosened the controls, they tell us they've just discovered, they write a memo about how corrupt the whole process was. Well, of course, they knew it all along. It wasn't ironic. It was hypocritical and criminal that they would do this. And I'm not so polite. I will put a fine point on it. These people, Republicans and Democrats, who reauthorized this and expanded this after they learned that even the unconstitutional rules that they had in place were being ignored. That is criminal. That is criminal, and it is bipartisan crime. And Stephen Colbert is a good example of the clueless people on both sides of this issue. Because if he is, one of the things, we're going to play this clip again, this interchange, where he cuts off Rand Paul, as Rand Paul is making a very important point, and he misdirects it into something that is really a non sequitur about what Rand Paul was talking about. And then says, oh, we're out of time. Go to a break. He gets the last word because he's not going, just like the Democrats, he is not going to respond to what you have to say. He's just going to essentially come back. Racist, sexist, homophobe, we've got to go to break. So what Rand Paul had been saying, that it's not part of this clip that we have, he said, I'm concerned. My biggest concern is over something that Madison said at the beginning of our country. So we have to get back to the foundation of putting our liberty first and understanding that the purpose of government is not to create a security state, a surveillance state. The purpose of government is to protect our liberties, not to make us a feather bed, not to feed us, not to clothe us, not to provide us with transportation or communication. The purpose of government is to protect our liberties and to act as an honest referee if we have disputes and so forth. That's why they created the government. According to the Constitution, according to the Declaration of Independence, I should say, the Constitution doesn't really state a purpose. The Declaration of Independence states why we created this country. that didn't operate with the Constitution for a number of years, operate under the Articles of Confederation, which I think is a better plan, along with the Bill of Rights. But anyway, he says, Madison said at the beginning of our country, men are not angels. And that's why we have the oversight of government, and we have to be very careful about it because they don't become angels when they get into the government. What he should ask is you should ask a pointed question to Stephen Colbert and say, Stephen Colbert, do you think that President Trump is an angel? Oh, well, of course, no, he doesn't, because all he does is attack him personally all the time, right? And so if you don't think that President Trump is an angel, Stephen Colbert, then why would you give him unchecked power? See, I don't think that Obama is an angel. I'm not willing to trust him with unchecked power. I'm not willing to trust even Rand Paul. If he asked for unchecked power, I wouldn't give it to him. He's not asking for it. Every man is capable of being corrupted by power. Now just take a look at the allegory in The Lord of the Rings. It really gets to the essence of human nature. The essence and the understanding of human nature that flowed out of the Christian theology that founded our country. The Christian values and the nature of man. They understood that man was fallen and could be very easily corrupted. And you see that in The Lord of the Rings as well, when they talk about that ring of power. If only I had that ring of power, I could do great things with it. No, you'd become a tyrant. It would corrupt you completely. And the political scientists at the time this country was founded well understood that. That's why they were trying to come up with something that had checks and balances in it that ultimately failed. The Constitution is a failed document. The Bill of Rights is still there, but it's completely ignored. So he says to him, let's play that clip, where he tries to explain to Stephen Colbert what the essence of the problem is here. Here's that clip again.
I'm concerned that we've given too much power to a prosecutor. He was supposed to go after Russian collusion. So far, he's gotten someone over. He recorded General Flynn's phone call and then got him to say something inconsistent with what was recorded in the phone call. Think about it from a personal perspective. If I had 1,000 phone calls from Stephen Colbert, what I could learn, and then if I can interview you, and if you say anything inconsistent with what you said on your private phone calls, I can put you in jail.
Well, if what I said in the private phone call was that, yeah, I met with the Russians over sanctions, and then you asked me, did you meet with the Russians over sanctions, and say no, then lock me up.
So what he pretends to say here is that, and we don't know if that was the issue. That's been widely reported that was the issue. We don't know that, if that's what they said to Michael Flynn, what Stephen Colbert said. But even if they had said that, as a member of the Trump transition team, it was not a problem to meet with a Russian representative. No law was broken. And so we get back to the point where they ask you something because they have a complete dossier. That's the dossier. The real dossier that we're talking about here, the dossier that is kept on each and every one of us by the federal government. So they have a complete dossier about everything you've ever said, and they ask you about the most minute detail as an entrapment. And Stephen Colbert pretends not to understand that that's what it's about, and he turns it into a partisan hack argument about a non-crime. So you get him to make a contradictory statement about something that is not a crime, and then you lock them up. So Stephen Colbert, who is so eager with his Democrat cronies to push this narrative about these scary Russians. He should read some history about some scary Russians. He should go back and read about Vladimir Lenin and Felix Dzerzhinsky, who ran the Cheka, the political secret police of their time. He should go back and listen to William Binney, who spent decades watching Soviet Russia, watching East Germany and the Stasi police. Stephen Colbert is so incredibly and contemptibly ignorant and biased. It makes me want to puke. You don't have any idea of the history of oppression. Even these scary Russians that you're so afraid of. You don't understand oppression in Russia. You don't understand oppression as it's been shown in every single society because of the nature of man. And you are inviting and applauding that kind of oppression because you think, like Boromir in Lord of the Rings, that you're going to have that ring of power. And that's why the Republicans and the Democrats continue to authorize these unconstitutional, tyrannical actions of our surveillance and police state. And so, yeah, let's expose some of this hypocrisy. That's going to be the crack to pull this thing down. And if we have to pull this temple down as we're attached to it, we'll do it. Because this tyranny will not stand. We will not be their slaves. We will not be their slaves. So the documents, as they show that Obama leaked Russian intelligence to probe Trump. See, that's who public enemy number one is. The buck stops there with President Obama, because all these criminals in the FBI and the Department of Justice worked for him. And they were covering up for Hillary Clinton as well. So yeah, he is public enemy number one. He should be public enemy number one of the FBI. They can be public enemy number two until they get ready to clean house. Judicial Watch released 42 pages of State Department documents yesterday, asserting they provide evidence that the Obama administration was trying to undermine Donald Trump's upcoming administration, reports WND. These documents, says Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton, these documents show the Obama State Department under John Kerry gathered and sent its own dossier of classified information on Russia to Senator Ben Cardin, a political ally in the U.S. Senate, in order to undermine President Trump. And then as we continue to see more criminal actions from Andrew McCabe, I mean, it's not just the ethical issues that he was under investigation for within the FBI against other FBI employees. It's not just the appearance and perhaps the illegal campaign contributions that were being accepted on behalf of his wife while he was investigating Hillary Clinton. It's not just the fact that he was falsifying interviews and telling his subordinates to do that, but now we find out also that he is under active investigation for sitting on the emails that were found on Weiner's laptop. So he's sitting on Weiner's laptop. This, folks, is why Comey had to come out. Hillary Clinton thinks that Comey lost the light. He was doing everything he could to help her, but he wasn't going to go down for her. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm David Knight, and we're going to get into this argument back and forth about the memo, the second memo that's been produced by Adam Schiff and others, the idea that, oh, you guys changed the memo, now you can't release it, whatever. We're going to talk about this, about the concerns of the FBI. Some people in the FBI are concerned that it won't be released. People at the top are concerned that it will be released. What does that tell you? We're going to take a look at this in just a moment. Before we get back to the news, I just want to remind you of some of the sales that we have at InfoWarsStore.com. The products that we sell at InfoWarsStore.com are what fund this operation, what keeps us independent. It's the direct sale of products to you, and we've got some of our newest products at very heavy discounts. We've got the Real Red Pill and Cellforce at 50% off. As a matter of fact, I just saw on the website, 53% off the Cellforce. I don't know what the deal is with that. I guess it's I guess they rounded it down to a number. So it's actually 53% off of Cellforce. We also have Carnivore and Floralife. And Floralife is our probiotic that is not killed by stomach acid. It gets all the way to your intestines before it releases the probiotics in your intestines where you really need that. So Carnivore and Floralife are both 33% off. We have Alexa Pure Breeze, the air purifier, the silent air purifier that we have in my family, and we really like that. That is $50 off. And our newest product, Bodies, that we just released within this last month, 50% off. A great way to fight against toxins, to support your liver, and to help your body to fight inflammation as well. Bodies, you'll find that at 50% off at InfoWarsStore.com, and we really do appreciate your support. All right, let's go back and take a look at this. We got Andrew McCabe. He's now being investigated because he sat on this these emails that were found on Weiner's laptop because of the sloppy, apathetic way that Huma Abedin and Hillary Clinton were handling the most classified materials we have. You know, it's amazing to me, the hypocrisy of all these people saying, oh, you can't release this. This is going to reveal information that nobody can know about. Hillary Clinton had the most classified information of the government. She created she bought a web domain name, ClintonEmails.com. It's like, come and get them right there. Puts them on a private server with no security whatsoever, and now they're freaking out. Let me tell you something, Washington, all your secrets are out. We even know how crooked you are with this investigation and your attempts to try to do a coup against Trump. We just want to show everybody the documents. We know what you've done. We've been talking about it here at InfoWars for over a year and a half. It was already obvious during the campaign. So we know what you've done. It isn't like this is something that nobody knows about. Oh, don't tell anybody. We've been telling everybody for over a year. And we all know what you're up to. And all the foreign governments, all your secrets belong to us, they say, right? Because of Hillary Clinton. But she's not going to go to jail. We had James Comey. He should go to jail for saying that she committed felonies, but he's not going to do anything about it, which, of course, really wasn't his decision anyway. It was the Attorney General's decision. But Hillary Clinton says James Comey cost her the election. Andrew McCabe sat on these emails for a month, found out about them and sat on them for a month before the election. And I really think, because these are found in the New York Police Department, and we said it at the time, look, the New York Police Department is going to let this stuff go out, and then it's going to catch Comey with his pants down, showing that he was covering up for Hillary yet again. And so that's why I put the stuff out there, and then Hillary has the audacity to say, he cost me the election because he didn't keep covering up for me. He wasn't going to go to jail for you or for McCabe, although he should go to jail for what he had done back on the 4th of July weekend. The Department of Justice Inspector General Michael Horowitz wants to know why McCabe allegedly took little to no action for approximately 3 weeks on the trove of emails sent by Hillary's top aide, Huma Abedin, Weiner's wife, which were discovered during an unrelated investigation into Weiner's sexting with an underage girl. They say the Inspector General, Michael Horowitz, has been asking witnesses why FBI leadership seemed unwilling to move forward on the examination of emails found on the laptop of former Congressman Anthony Weiner. That would be a rhetorical question. We know why. We know why. And in late October, about 3 weeks after first being alerted to the issue, according to these people, a key question of the internal investigation is whether McCabe or anyone else at the FBI wanted to avoid taking action on the laptop findings until after the election. These people said, it is unclear whether the Inspector General has reached any conclusions on that point, says the Washington Post. And a understatement here. And of course, it's not just the memo. It's the Inspector General's report. And as Christopher Wray looked at this, it's like, hey, McCabe, you got to go. You got to go. Maybe we can preserve your pension. But I'm not really too sure about that. He should be going to jail. Andrew McCabe should be going to jail. And as we look at this, as the Daily Caller points out, Peter Strzok in these latest emails is talking about this. They got called up to Andy's. Andy, who would that be? Remember when Trey Gowdy went on, it was either MSNBC or CNN, and some info babe was asking him something, and he said something about Andy. Who would be Andy? He says, well, it might be Andrew McCabe or something. Are you accusing Andrew McCabe of this? Well, I'm not saying it's him or not him, but it's, Andy. Maybe it's Andy from Toy Story. But I got called up to Andy's bedroom. No, it doesn't say bedroom. Andy's earlier. Hundreds of thousands of emails turned over by Weiner's attorney to the police department in New York includes a ton of material from the spouse, sending the team up tomorrow to review. This will never end. So that's how they were able to put a time date on that. They found that email from that text from Peter Strzok to his lawyer mistress on September the 28th. So they knew that Andrew McCabe, that Andy, had the texts, the emails from Weiner's lap. And they had been sitting on it. Strzok and Page, says the Daily Caller, have already made headlines for messages that discuss needing. Yeah, they are, as I would say, the inconvenient whistleblowers of this whole thing. The unintentional whistleblowers. Now they have exposed the fact that Andrew McCabe sat on this for 3 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks. But the FBI yesterday says that they opposed the memo release due to inaccurate information. Oh, well, okay, they say it's inaccurate. Let's put it out there and have a discussion about this. Why continue to hide this? They say they have grave concerns. We have grave concerns about material omissions and the fact and facts that fundamentally impact the memo's accuracy. Okay, we can handle the truth. Put it out. White House Chief of Staff John Kelly says it will be released here pretty quick, I think, and then the whole world can see it. And again, that came after what we played for you multiple times. President Trump, he was asked by a Republican congressman, didn't ask, but the Republican congressman said, release a memo. And he goes, that's 100%. You can count on it. And now the chief of staff says it's going to be happening pretty quickly. Schiff is now getting desperate. Adam Schiff. It's getting so desperate. He says, Nunes gave Trump a secretly altered version of the memo. Here's the clip we got. Let's run video clip number 3.
That's really not the goal. The goal is to put out a document that will set a narrative that helps the president, and that narrative is the FBI is corrupt, what they're doing is corrupt, the whole investigation is corrupt, Bob Mueller is corrupt. You should bring an end to this investigation. And that is, I think, singularly destructive. It only encourages the White House to engage in conduct that could bring about a constitutional crisis. And I think you began this segment at the right point, and that is showing the chairman's ill-fated trip to the White House to present them evidence of a conspiracy of unmasking in the Obama administration. And we later learned that was information he had actually gotten from the White House. But what we're seeing today is a continuation of that same kind of stratagem in concert with the White House that obviously doesn't tell us anything about what the Russians did or anything about what the Trump campaign did, but isn't designed to. It's designed to distract and to undermine the special counsel.
And to show.
All right. So he puts this thing out and says, they made some changes in here, and we didn't approve those changes, so they violated the process. You know what? Why are they so afraid of this? If it was secretly altered, if the Republicans are doing something wrong, then put it out there. Let's put it out there. Let's have that discussion. Here's what Trey Gowdy had to say. Let's play video clip number 4. I think we can get through that.
I think it'll be embarrassing to Adam Schiff once people realize the extent to which he went to keep them from learning any of this. So that would be an embarrassment.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
What do you mean? By that?
I mean, going to court to help Fusion GPS, so we can't find out that they paid for the dossier and that they were working for the DNC. That's a pretty big step to go to court to try to keep the American people from learning something. So look, if it were up to Adam Schiff, you wouldn't know about Hillary Clinton's email, you wouldn't know about the server, you wouldn't know who paid for the dossier. So I do find it ironic that he has his own memo now, because if it were up to him, we wouldn't know any of it.
And we're going to talk about that memo when we come back. But yeah, he's going to be very embarrassed when this stuff comes out. That's why he doesn't want it out there. And he didn't want any of this other stuff to come out. He didn't want you to know about the server, the dossier, the DNC, none of that stuff. We'll be right back. I'm David Knight. We're going to keep going with this memo, the back and forth politics, and the cover-up and the corruption. And then we're going to get to some news. Typically, I'll do news breaks at the top of the hour. And there is a lot of interesting news that has come out about the Las Vegas shooting, about missiles in Hawaii, and about nullification of the NDA's indefinite detention under Obama. So we're going to be talking about that coming up later in the broadcast. Also, we'll be joined in the third hour with an individual who's doing a documentary promoting transhumanism, and he's here for a transhumanist conference here in Austin. So we'll be talking to him about that issue in the third hour. But going on to this, we just heard Adam Schiff saying that they can't release this. They've made some material alterations in this. He said, we discovered late tonight. He tweeted this out last night at 9 p.m. Breaking, discovered late tonight that Chairman Nunes made material changes to the memo that he sent to the White House. Changes not approved by the committee. White House therefore reviewed a document the committee has not approved for release. Well, okay. Is it a problem that the president gets to see this without the permission of Adam Schiff? So the president can declassify and release this on his own. He doesn't need the House Intelligence Committee. And as a matter of fact, any of these individuals, as both Glenn Greenwald has pointed out on the left and Judge Napolitano on the right have pointed out, any of these congressmen or women could read the 4-page memo on the floor of the House and they would not face any kind of criminal prosecution. And they've been able to do that from the very beginning. So it isn't any, that is not an excuse, but he is desperate to keep this quiet. And that's what you just heard Trey Gowdy say. He said, my Democratic colleagues didn't want us to find this information. They did everything they could to keep us from finding this information. And if it was up to them, you wouldn't know about the DNC paying for the dossier. You wouldn't know about who wrote it, the devious means that they used to create this thing, how they shopped it around. Probably McCain is going to get a pass on this because of his help. But he plays a key role in this as well. And even going to court to help Fusion GPS to cover up who paid for this. So he said, you wouldn't know about Hillary Clinton's emails. You wouldn't know about any of this stuff if it was up to Adam Schiff. So he's out there pretending that he doesn't want this to happen. And then a spokesperson for Nunes, Jack Langer, says this is a strange attempt to thwart the publication of the memo. He said it's an increasingly strange attempt to thwart this publication. The committee minority is now complaining about minor edits to the memo, including grammatical fixes and 2 edits requested by the FBI and the minority themselves. The vote to release the memo was absolutely procedurally sound, and he said to suggest otherwise is a bizarre distraction. Well, it's not that bizarre. We certainly understand the motivations of Adam Schiff. He says it's a bizarre distraction from the abuses that are detailed in the memo, which the public will hopefully soon be able to read for themselves. So here's the deal. Adam Schiff, you release the one that you say was approved by the House Intelligence Committee. You release that so you can embarrass those Republicans about all those material changes that were made. And let's see if they added some commas around a phrase or something. You put that out there and let the people decide for themselves if the Republicans did something dishonest. Because that original memo that you are so that you didn't want released, and now you're saying, well, now they're going to release something else. Well, we're going to see the memo that was changed. You say they're material changes. They say they're not material changes. So you have been authorized by the vote of the Intelligence Committee to release what you say is something that is materially different. So you do that, Adam Schiff. We'll call your bluff. People are going to see how he has been bluffing, how he has been deceiving, and I hope it goes beyond embarrassment for this guy. I really do. Stay with us. Be right back. I'm David Knight. Welcome back. At the top of the hour, and many radio stations don't cover that because they're covering news. At the top of the hour, we were talking about Adam Schiff and the fact that he said they voted to release something that is materially different. And a spokesperson for Nunes said, this is really bizarre. The extent that these guys will go to try to cover up this information. Let's get this out there and let the American people see it. And I say that's absolutely true. Because the American people, and of course, we'll call the bluff of Adam Schiff, you released that memo that the House Intelligence Committee said to release. Because nothing will happen to you, Adam. So you can put that out there. There's another one that's going to be released that was given to President Trump, which the Republicans say that just had a couple of grammatical fixes in it and some punctuation stuff. And so if it is a material, you let the American people decide if it's a material difference or not, or whether or not you are trying to obstruct an investigation, whether or not you are trying to cover up criminal actions, Adam Schiff. And so put it out there. Let them see it. Now, he is making a lot of noise about, hey, I've got a memo. I've got a memo, and they won't let me show you my memo. And a lot of them have said, go ahead and do it. And again, going back to what Glenn Greenwald said, what Judge Napolitano said, look, any member of Congress can read these memos on the House floor, both of them, or all 3 of them, whatever. Can read these memos on the House floor, and there will be no criminal action that can be taken against them. So Adam Schiff can put out his memo if he wishes. Or it can be declassified by the House Intelligence Committee. It can be declassified by President Trump. They could read it on the House floor, all these different ways it could be put out there. And so let's just call his bluff and tell him to do it. But this is what Kentucky Representative Thomas Massey told the Daily Caller yesterday. He said they can't release their memo. He said they've already reciprocated with their own memo, which I've already read today. And number one, it's talking past the Republicans. Isn't that what they always do? They never come in and say, well, you said that this happened, and I'm going to say that that's why that didn't happen. They don't address that. They talk past it, or they just say, you're a racist, sexist, homophobe, and I'm not even going to talk to you. You're not even worthy to be talked. Or you can do a Stephen Colbert and say, yeah, Michael Flynn's a criminal. Lock him up. We're got to go to break. Sorry, no more time to talk about the surveillance state, Senator Paul. So they're talking past the Republicans in their memo. It makes statements, says Congressman Thomas Massey, who has seen Adam Schiff's memo. It makes statements that are probably true, but it doesn't really dispute the statements in the Republican memo. And I don't think the Democrat memo is going to be released. And the reason why it's not going to get released is a Democrat memo. It's about 3 times longer than the Republican one, and theirs discloses sources and methods that can't be released. So there you go. It would compromise our national security, you know, kind of like putting the most secure emails and communications between heads of states on some private server and saying, Hillary Clinton's emails are right here.com. That's what they did. Yeah, so we gotta be very careful about all those sources and methods in case nobody realizes what those sources and methods are after the Snowden releases. So yeah, they're still making that go. Now, Trey Gowdy, as you heard him say, he's not going to be running again for Congress. And in his statement, he said he's now going to be advocating on behalf of justice in our court system. I will not be filing for re-election to Congress nor seeking other political or elected office. Instead, I will be returning to the justice system. And then he finishes up by saying, this is the right time for me to leave politics and return to the justice system. And I said when he made, you know, he's been on target with the things that he said about this investigation, except for the fact that he wouldn't criticize Robert Mueller, a guy who was brought in immediately before 9/11. And I have an update on 9/11 from the BBC today for you as well. He was brought in like a week before 9/11, and he has covered up for all of that deception. He has presided over the expansion of the police state and the surveillance state without doing his job. He's covered up for all that stuff just like he's covered up for the Clintons. And Trey Gowdy said, well, none of this has anything to do with Bob Mueller. He's a great guy. And I said when I saw this, like, wait a minute. What's he up to here? Is he looking for some new job or something? And then shortly after that, he said, well, I'm not running, but I'm going to be going back to law practice. And now the Daily Caller points out that he was approached for a federal judgeship. So we got to be nice to these guys now so he can become a federal judge. 4-term Republican announced on Wednesday that he'll retire from Congress just one day after Judge Dennis Shedd of the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals assumed a senior status, which is essentially a quasi-retirement, they point out. But then a source close to Trey Gowdy said he is not planning on becoming a judge. He was approached months ago, and he turned it down. The source added that he will return to private practice. All right, so we'll see about that. Mueller still is a criminal. He is a criminal. He's been covering for Hillary Clinton. He's been covering for the police surveillance state that was put in with the Patriot Act after the false flag of 9/11, and I'm not going to make any excuses for Robert Mueller. The FBI has gone to war on the Republican memo, as I pointed out before, saying they had grave concerns, saying it was inaccurate, saying it would reveal their biggest secrets. And here's what former FBI Deputy Assistant Director Danny Coulson had to say about that.
What we're talking about here is truth. Was there any effort or any attempt or any actual success in misleading the FISA court? And if that happened, then I think we need to know about that. And that memorandum's got to reflect that question and that answer for the American people. There's a lot at stake here. This is not just a memo. This is the reputation of a federal agency. The FISA court is essential in the war against terrorism. I've used it many, many times, and we need that. And if we somehow denigrate the process that allows that court to reach a decision, that hurts everybody. It will be very circumspect about what we try to, or what the Bureau tries to bring to them, and we need to know the facts here. If that happened, then the people that did that, if it was done, need to be severely judged on what they did. If they didn't do it, we need to know that too.
Again, we need to have more people like Danny Coulson, like William Binney, people who said, yes, we do need to know what foreign actors are doing, but we also need to protect against internal surveillance, because the weapons that we use against tyrants abroad will be used for tyranny at home. That was another thing that the founders always told us. That was the nature of humans. And so William Binney, Danny Coulson are saying, look, it's essential for this institution, if you don't want it to become corrupt, it has to always, any institution that is composed of human beings has to be constantly purging and reforming itself. You have to purge out the bad actors, because there's not going to be any institution. You know, you put on a uniform and a badge, that doesn't make you an angel. You get elected to office, that doesn't make you an angel. It puts you in a position where you have a lot of temptations to become corrupted by that power. And so they have to be watched very carefully. And there has to be a lot of transparency. And when something comes to light that has been done criminally Those people have to be purged. They have to be punished as an example to others. This is why I have a problem, to jump over to DACA, for example. This is why I have a problem with saying we're going to accept as a framework for immigration the fact that these people deserve to have a pathway to citizenship. What you're doing there is you're saying we're going to condone illegal activity. We're not going to punish it. And you send that message to other people and you get more of it. And the same thing, for the same reason that we have to punish these criminals in the FBI, we have to punish Hillary Clinton. Because if you condone that, you're going to get a lot more of it. People will know that they can get away with it. And no matter what kind of controls you want to put in, no matter how high you build your wall, if you tell people if they can make it in the United States, they got a free ride. Just like the story I've told about the parents who came from mainland China and they wanted to go to Hong Kong Disney, and it was all full up. And they just dropped their kids over the fence. Because, once you get in there, all the rides are free. And they don't have the heart to throw you out. And that's what they did with DACA. That's what they've done with these criminals in the FBI and the criminals in the Democrat Party. And we have to stop allowing people to get away with these crimes, especially the people at the top. It's only the little people at the bottom that get punished. The big guys always go free, don't they? We'll be right back. I'm David Knight. Welcome back. I want to say one more thing about this dispute back and forth between Devin Nunes, the Republican Party, President Trump, and Adam Schiff and the leadership of the FBI. Because we just heard the former Deputy Assistant Director of the FBI, Danny Coulson, who says, look, we need to get to the truth. Let's pretend in America for a minute here that truth, justice, and liberty matter to the Department of Justice, that they matter to the FBI. And all these Democrats, NPR, they're saying, oh, yeah, Eric Holder, we got to protect the institutions here. No, what you need to protect are truth, justice, and liberty. That's the American way, Superman. But that's what needs to be protected. And if these organizations are destructive of those, let's go back to the Declaration of Independence, right? We have inalienable rights that are given to us by our Creator. And we create governments to protect those rights, those liberties. And when government becomes destructive of those, this is the part that they don't have you memorize in school. They probably don't even have the kids look at the Declaration of Independence anymore because it talks about men, it talks about the Creator, and so forth. So they probably don't even, but they had us memorize the first half of the opening paragraph. What they didn't want us to memorize was that when government becomes destructive of those liberties and those rights, that it is the right and the duty of the people to alter or abolish that government. And that includes institutions like the FBI. So the FBI, if it is not going to protect our liberty, if it is going to be destructive of our liberty, if it is going to engage in this type of activity, it needs to be altered or abolished. So you just keep up this stuff. If you don't want to reform your organization, or your institution, then it needs to be altered or abolished, and we'll do it for you. How about that? And so Devin Nunes says after the FBI goes to war, as the Daily Mail puts it, Daily Mail, FBI goes to war with a Republican memo, saying it's inaccurate and will reveal their biggest secrets. And so Devin Nunes says, having stonewalled Congress's demands for information for nearly a year, it's no surprise to see the FBI and the Department of Justice issue spurious objections to allowing the American people to see information related to surveillance abuses at these agencies. He wrote this, I said, in an angry statement released by his office. He parroted back language that the FBI used to criticize the memo, which the Bureau said had material omissions that made its release reckless. And Nunes said, the FBI is intimately familiar with material omissions with respect to their presentations to both Congress and the courts. In other words, they've lied to Congress. They've covered up information from Congress, not just the American people, because Congress is the representatives of the American people as well, but not even the congressmen were told the truth by the FBI. So he goes, oh, you want to talk about the fact we got material omissions? How about what you've been doing for the last 1 year plus? That's material omissions. And he goes, they are welcome to make public, to the greatest extent possible, all the information that they have on these abuses. See, those abuses are their biggest secret. But I find it interesting that, as I pointed out, NPR felt compelled to give its low information liberal readers an update on the memo from their simplistic, biased perspective. And now they've got another article up here because we're about to see a lot of this in spades. A report alleges police used secret evidence collected by the feds to make arrests, kind of like what they did with Michael Flynn and others and many people in the Trump administration and let's play that clip to remind everybody what Michael Hayden, former head of the NSA and the CIA, said when he was bragging to law students at Washington and Lee University about what he finds to be interesting as a former director of the NSA and the CIA.
This is not about guilt. In fact, let me be really clear, okay? NSA doesn't just listen to bad people. NSA listens to interesting people. People.
Yeah. I'm going to put that at the top of my YouTube channel for this program, Real News with David Knight, because I want everybody that goes to that to see. I took that whole speech apart, phrase by phrase, bit by bit. And I want you to send it to people like Brian Kilmeade, who was pushing back on Senator Rand Paul. Senator Rand Paul went on Fox News and basically gave the same presentation that he was trying to give to Stephen Colbert. Stephen Colbert cut him off. Brian Kilmeade, but we've got to have this information to protect us from bad guys. Let me tell you who the bad guys are. Michael Hayden, James Clapper, John Brennan, James Comey, Andrew McCabe. Those are the bad guys. Those are the guys who have unrestricted power. They have no legal restrictions upon them, they believe. And they're going to look at interesting people. And they don't care whether they're Americans. They'll do it without a warrant. As Senator Rand Paul was trying to explain to Brian Kilmeade, he said, look, we have exceptions for emergencies. It's the same thing. If you're a police officer, you need to have a search warrant to go into somebody's house. Unless you hear somebody screaming and you hear shooting going on inside or whatever, there's an emergency. And then you don't have to have a search warrant to go in there. They try to pretend that whenever you try to put any restrictions on this surveillance police state, that's like saying, well, that's like telling a police officer you can't go in if somebody's being beaten to death inside the house. That's not the case. That's not the case for the police. Never has been. And that's not what we're talking about here. And when you get these conservative shills like Brian Kilmeade out there shilling for the police state, or these other individuals some of whom don't work at Fox News anymore, saying, after they see a shooting in Paris, I want more of a police state. All these people out there saying we got too much of a police state. I want more of a police state. Those are the people who are really pushing this stuff. There's people on both the left and the right who are basically in a suicide pact against our country here. So let's move on here from the District of Criminals, the RICO District of Criminals, racketeering and corrupt organizations. Let's talk about what's going on in Las Vegas. We have a coroner who is defying a court order to release the autopsy of this alleged mass shooter, Stephen Paddock. He's been ordered by a judge because the Las Vegas paper there, the Las Vegas Review-Journal, said, we'd like to see the autopsy report. And it said, we're not going to show it to you. And so they went to court. They set him in court. They spent $32,000 in legal costs. And the judge ordered the Las Vegas Police Department, that is the Las Vegas taxpayer, to pay $32,000 in court costs for this and said, that's right, you got to show them the autopsy. And at this point, the coroner is still saying, still not going to do it, not going to do it. How do they do this? I mean, President Trump and Jeff Sessions, as soon as some lower court judge says, well, we're going to, no, sorry, you don't have any control over the borders or any control over immigration policy, going to take that executive order away. Now, Obama's executive orders, we're going to honor those, but not yours. And they go, oh, okay. All right, I'm sorry. I hope I didn't waste your time. But this coroner says, no, I'm not going to do it. You can't make me. Here's the deal. They said, we're not going to do it till we finalize it. And the newspaper there says, you've already cremated the guy. How could you not have a finalized autopsy? The shooter's body was cremated back on December the 21st. How can the autopsy report not be finalized? It was cremated, the body was cremated 5 weeks ago. As one individual said, what's glaring are the missing details in the autopsy. We'll be right back with something that people in Hawaii really should panic about. I'm David Knight. Welcome back, and we're going to talk about something that just happened in Hawaii, which really should concern the people there. They were very concerned after that false alarm. And I didn't hear too many people saying, you know, what we need here is civil defense. They do need civil defense. Obviously, they didn't have it. People, as they were panicking, were putting their kids in drains. We'll talk about that in a moment. But now something else has happened that should be concerning to them. We're also going to talk about the nullification of NDAA indefinite detention in Idaho, and New Hampshire pushing back against a sales tax from other states that do have sales tax. They don't have a sales tax in New Hampshire. They're one of, I think, 5 states. New Hampshire, Texas, Florida, and a couple of others don't have a state sales tax. And so they're saying, look, you're not going to press our merchants into collecting sales tax for you if they sell something online. We're not going to collect the sales tax for Michigan and send it to them. And this is going to go to the Supreme Court. It's the first time they've revisited this for a while. So we'll talk about that as well as some immigration news in just a moment. Before we do, real quickly, I want to remind you of the products that we sell at InfoWarsStore.com. That's what funds this program. That's what funds everything that we do at InfoWars. InfoWarsStore.com. And some of the specials that we have some of our newest products. Cellforce, the Real Red Pill, 50% off. Carnivore and Floor Life. Floor Life, a probiotic that helps your digestion, helps your gut health. It's not just, both of those products. Carnivore helps your digestion. Floor Life is probiotics that help your gut health. And there have been a lot of articles lately, scientific studies that people have done talking about gut health and its importance to your overall health. Those 2 products are 33% off. Alexa Pure Breeze, air purifier, great time of year to have an air purifier because everybody's got their houses locked up. Even here in Texas, it's so cold that we have to tighten up the house and keep it warm. So at that time of year, it's now $50 off. Alexa Pure Breeze, a great way to purify your air. Do it silently, and it's a very attractive package as well. We really like that. We have it in our family. And finally, Bod Ease, which is a new product that just was released in the last month or so. And we got an early release of it, and my wife and I have found that to be an excellent product for helping with joint pain, helping with inflammation of joints. But it also is very effective in fighting against toxins and for supporting your liver. Take a look at the ingredients. Do your own research. And that's the freedom that you have in this country. So use it and make sure that you don't lose it. And make sure you don't lose your freedom of speech. We thank you for your support here at InfoWars because that's what keeps us independent and free. All right, let's talk about what's going on in Hawaii. And again, as this happened, it took me back to my childhood, Cuban Missile Crisis when I was in Florida, the duck and cover drills. Telling everybody, they told us in elementary school, stick your head in your desk. What good is that going to do, right? Stick your head in the metal desk. And, of course, at the time that all that stuff was happening, you had the federal government telling people, hey, if there is a nuclear missile coming in and you get the warning, get out of the cities that they're aiming for. Let's hope that the Russians had good aim. They're going to hit the cities. So you drive out as much as possible. And then when you see a big flash in the distance, get out of your car and get down in the ditch. Good advice. That's going to really help. And, of course, the British did an excellent cartoon lampooning the kind of non-civil defense that we get from our governments called When the Wind Blows. This elderly couple, it was done as a cartoon. This elderly couple was listening to the radio, following all the advice from their government, and slowly dying of radiation poisoning while they're doing it. But, when it comes to civil defense, you can build civil defense structures for people, which we never really did much of that here in the United States. There we go. These guys are fast here. That's the cartoon When the Wind Blows. Amusing in a very black comedy kind of way. I guess that's kind of my sense of humor. Anyway, we've always kind of put that on a back burner. Yeah, we've got some tube stations, and there were some buildings that were designated as civil defense areas, whether they really were or not, if they had a basement. I mean, they really didn't have a lot of buildings with basements in Florida when I was growing up, so it really wasn't an option there. And that's something that I haven't really thought about for a very long time. The aggressive nations like Russia and North Korea, they do things like that because they're expecting to get involved into a war. But we don't really do that. But we do have other things that we've talked about, and that is a missile defense system. Remember Star Wars, Reagan's Star Wars, and how the Democrats didn't like that idea? I thought it was a great idea if they could do it. And here we are, 30-some-odd years later. It's one of these other things that came out of the Reagan administration that didn't seem to quite work too well. Kind of like that amnesty in exchange for security deal that they did with the illegal immigrants in 1986, right after they had pushed through a tax cut. Yeah. Still keep using that same playbook. But the other thing is they're having some problems with this. And I pointed this out. A couple of investigators had looked at the missile attacks into Saudi Arabia, into the capital of Saudi Arabia, Riyadh. One of them at the airport, another one close to the palace, and said, look, these primitive Yemen missiles, they were not really intercepted. We were told that they were intercepted, but it doesn't look like they were intercepted, especially the one at the airport. It doesn't look like the air defense was very effective there. And now we've had another U.S. missile interceptor test that has failed in Hawaii. So you people in Hawaii, you want to panic about something? I find it interesting that there was so much talk about pushing the wrong button, and in the last few days we've had information about how the button pusher was somebody that they knew he was a problem all along, and he should have not been there, and so forth and so on, and now they say he got fired or whatever. But they're not talking about this story. This story is kind of buried because they want you to think that we've got a missile defense system here. And as Anti-War points out, failures are not uncommon given the difficulty of intercepting missiles in midair. It's like hitting a bullet with another bullet. This failure, however, comes with the Pentagon being unusually tight-lipped, admitting only that the test took place and refusing to say what went wrong. This test yesterday failed, proving unable to intercept test intermediate-range missiles out of the air. And this is the second straight failure of the system that has embarrassed the U.S., but I would also point out that it also comes on the heels of what we've seen in Saudi Arabia. Now, some good news. Idaho is moving a bill to nullify NDAA indefinite detention. I've mentioned this a couple of times in the program, so let's get down into the details here. We've got a couple of minutes here. We'll probably have to carry it into the next segment. This is an article from the New American, and they point out lawmakers in Idaho voted unanimously. That's the good news. This is a bipartisan move in Idaho to protect individual liberties against an unconstitutional act that was signed by Obama when he said he wouldn't sign it. He said, yeah, that's not good. I'm not going to sign it. And then he signed it on New Year's Eve when nobody was looking, he thought. It would prohibit the indefinite detention of Americans that was snuck into the bill that authorizes defense spending back in 2012. If passed into law, it will nullify that law. And that's the rightful remedy, folks. Using the 9th and 10th Amendment to say, you know what, you don't have the power to do this. As a matter of fact, in this particular case, you are explicitly prohibited from doing what you claim you have the power to do with the NDAA. And we're not going to allow you to do it. And we will stop you from doing that in Idaho. They say the NDAA 2012, that part of it, purports to authorize the capture and imprisonment of citizens by the U.S. military without any semblance of due process. Some local governments in Idaho have already passed similar measures. The indefinite detention provisions of the 2012 NDAA pretended to authorize this for anybody that was a suspected terrorist. A suspected terrorist. You could be authorized, or you could be authorized. You could be captured. You could be transported to another country. They could take you to Gitmo, they said. So we can do all that stuff to you. And Lindsey Graham said, shut up. You don't get a lawyer. Remember that? Remember that despicable guy? We'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm David Knight, and we've just been talking about the rightful remedy to federal encroachment and disobedience against the law. And this is very appropriate because what we're talking about is the abuse of with this memo, we're talking about the abuse of the FISA Act. We're talking about the abuse of the Department of Justice, the FBI. And of course, this all rolls back up to public enemy number one, Barack Obama, because this was all done under his supervision of people who work for him and who still support him. And people like Stephen Colbert want to pretend that this doesn't happen, that the Ed Snowden leaks never happened. They don't care about it. But there are people on the left who do. And Idaho is a good example of this, because this pushback against unconstitutional federal actions was done unanimously, and good for the Democrats there. You know, there are some good Democrats, and evidently in Idaho as well, right? One of them who co-signed this bill is running for governor. And I'm glad that they understand that their liberties are at danger, just like Republicans feel like their liberties are at danger. That's what's so despicable about people like Stephen Colbert. So incredibly partisan that they will sell themselves into slavery just to get back at the other side. And when we look at the bad guys in this, it's not just Obama. Remember, it was Lindsey Graham, as I pointed out before we went to break, who said, this bill will designate the world as a battlefield, including the homeland. And shut up, you don't get a lawyer. Well, shut up, Lindsey Graham. You shouldn't get another term. And I don't know what's the matter with the people in South Carolina. Why do they keep sending that guy? He's worse than most of the Democrats, far worse than most of the Democrats. He's a neocon, warmongering, authoritarian, open border guy. It's people like Lindsey Graham who've watered down this position of President Trump towards DACA, continually pushing on that. And President Trump needs to stop listening to these never-Trumpers who he's now brought into the White House to advise him on what to do about DACA. These people are always for open borders. They don't want us to have border security. They want to put amnesty and citizenship first, and any kind of security is going to come way, way, way down the road decades later, if it comes at all. And we never got it from I'm still waiting for my border security from 1986 and the President Reagan's promises to me at that point in time. So I'm sorry. I'm very angry and cynical about hearing all this stuff, and I don't care who's making these promises and who's walking back these promises. Do what you said you're going to do. Follow the agenda that you got elected on, that you campaigned on, and don't listen to people like Lindsey Graham, who wants to give us open borders and indefinite detention without trial, without even being charged with a crime. You think that they won't do that? You think they won't do it? They already have. They already have. They did it to the Japanese during World War II. Remember the detention of the Japanese Americans? And some of that happened in Idaho. So a lot of the people spoke out. The Republican, Representative Zollinger, noted that some of the people had been interred, some of the Japanese Americans had been interred in Idaho. And Antonin Scalia told his law students in 2014, he said, "You're kidding yourself if you think the same thing will not happen again. We do not want to give this power to Obama, to Trump, to Lindsey Graham, to anybody. Not to the military, not to Mattis, not to any of these people. They don't have it, and we're not going to give it to them. We're not going to let them have it." And so I'm glad that the Republicans and Democrats both agreed that it is unconstitutional. Think about the fact that they have, in the name of the war on drugs, they have pushed this civil asset forfeiture where they say they can take your property without ever even charging you with a crime, let alone finding you guilty of a crime. And you understand that they think that you're their property as well, right? You are their property. You're the inventory property. We're going to talk about that with the people that are coming here to talk about transhumanism. One of the things that they love to talk about, I interviewed Zoltan Istvan, who was head of the Transhumanist Party. He loves to talk about the insert that he got that lets him not have to carry around car keys. It's like, well, man, that's a small benefit to basically make yourself a piece of inventory for the government, to expose yourself to criminals who can, you say you're going to use that to pay for stuff as well as to get into your house and use that as a car key or something. Well, let me tell you something. If that's going to be your wallet, that little chip in your hand, you're going to have all kinds of people, not just the government tracking you around. You're going to have all kinds of people hacking into your wallet all the time as you go around. But see, when I see this kind of stuff and this kind of misuse of technology, because technology can always be used for good or for bad. It's a two-edged sword, right? The question is, does it increase or decrease our liberty? Does it make us property of somebody else? Does it make us their inventory? And so we talk about civil asset forfeiture and the fact that they feel entitled to take your property without even charging you with a crime. Do you think they will take your freedom, your liberty, put you in there? Because we see all of this stuff coming out all the time about how now they want to track you. Now, it may be a national ID card with biometric information on it. Maybe they're not going to go right away to demanding that you get something injected into your hand. But all these people who are pushing for border security, many people who are conservatives are saying we have to have a national ID card to keep these illegals from working in the United States. You watch. This border war that we're creating here is going to be as abusive and as ineffective as our war on the drugs has been for the last 50 years. It's going to take away our freedoms, and it's not going to do anything to stop the problem as long as we incentivize it by saying, hey, you're going to be part of the framework. You're Americans. We love you. You can stay here, even though you're not Americans, even though you violated the law to come here. They went on to say, and this is what the Idaho bill says, it is the determination of this Congress that the United States is not a battlefield subject to the laws of war, and that neither the U.S. Congress nor the President can constitutionally apply the laws of war to any person in the United States or citizens of the United States who is not serving in the armed services in a time of war. So they said, yeah, you can have some exceptions. You do whatever you want to the people who are in the armed services. If you say you're the military, and if they're doing something, abusing something, you can detain those people. And they've got a separate system of justice for people who are in the military. But we have a system of justice that's defined by the Constitution's Bill of Rights. And you're not going to just throw that away. And I think once we start recapturing nullification, we've seen it. Now, the nullification is not a theory. It's a reality. And it is, as I talked to the, I can't remember, Michael Maharrey, that's it, from the 10th Amendment Center. And he was saying, look, you've got a couple of different extremes. You can have either total government tyranny on the one extreme, or you can have secession, which may lead to war if the federal government doesn't want let people govern themselves. We've seen that happen in the past. And then you've got a middle ground where you say, you know what, you overstepped your boundary. We have division of power. There's the federal government, and then there's the state governments. And so the states have reserved powers to themselves, and the people have rights, and we're not going to allow those laws to exist. That's the middle ground. And that's already being applied in the war on drugs, marijuana prohibition. Already doing that. That is a massive nullification of state law. Over half the states have medical marijuana, and now it is rapidly happening in terms of just recreational use or whatever uses that people want to do with it. And so I think that's the important thing. That's why I talk about the war on drugs. I'm not encouraging the use of drugs. You know, there's an interesting story that came out of Ontario about that. They had a couple of cops go into a store and grab some marijuana edibles. They didn't know how much of that they should take. And they were found literally up a tree calling for help later. And so, you know, that's what happens when you abuse police and when you abuse prohibition. You know, it was a misuse of police to go around and take that stuff from people. And then the police misused marijuana, not just their police powers. You know, I don't approve of the misuse of either of those things, either the police or pot. But I do approve of governments standing up, state governments saying, this is not going to go, and nullifying that. And as we see it happening with marijuana, as we see it happening with the NDAA indefinite detention, we should see it happening in New Hampshire. They have, both New Hampshire and Vermont, had the legislatures. They didn't do it by referendum like most of the other states have done it in terms of marijuana, but they did it by the state legislatures after Jeff Sessions said, we're not going to let this stuff stand. They said, oh, yeah, really? So the state legislatures in New Hampshire and Vermont said, we're going to legalize marijuana. And both governors said, we're going to sign the bill. At least one of them is Republican, maybe both of them. Now New Hampshire is in a situation with online sales tax, and this is a situation where I think they ought to also use nullification. State of New Hampshire will argue to the U.S. Supreme Court that it should not overturn an existing precedent that would subject New Hampshire citizens and businesses to out-of-state sales tax. New Hampshire is one of 5 states that does not impose sales taxes, and now we have, I think it is South Dakota is coming after them. The governor said, I'm going to do everything in my power to fight this outrageous attempt to force New Hampshire's businesses to collect out-of-state taxes. We are a no-sales tax state, and that applies across the board to our citizens. Welcome back. The U.S. Border Patrol in Laredo reported that 76 illegal immigrants were found crammed into the back of a tractor trailer as they were coming through. 76 dreamers in the big parade. with 110 cartels right behind. It is a big parade. It's not going to stop as long as we pretend that we don't have any borders, as long as we don't respect our borders and we don't respect our laws. Why would we expect anybody else to? And as they're talking about this, they said this was people from Mexico, from Honduras, from El Salvador, from Guatemala that were discovered as they were being smuggled in to the country, including 13 unaccompanied children. So I guess the question I have when I see that is, if there's 13 unaccompanied children, how many accompanied children are there? They're dreamers. They're dreamers. And they said these criminal organizations view these individuals as mere commodities without regard for their safety. That is true of the Democrat Party as well, the DNC. That criminal organization regards these individuals as mere commodities without regard for their safety. And they said as they've been looking at cell phones over the last year, they have seen a rapid increase in the number of cell phones that they looked at. They've looked at 30,000 cell phones as opposed to 19,000 in 2016. 80% of those devices belong to foreigners or legal permanent residents, with less than 1 in 5 owned by a U.S. citizen. We cannot control our borders. And one of the reasons we cannot control our borders is, again, because we cannot control our welfare state. An example out of Michigan reported by WND points out that a dog has now gotten state approval for unemployment benefits. The dog was approved for $360 a week in unemployment benefits by the state of Michigan. They believe that the dog, named Ryder, has been busy working at a Detroit area restaurant until he was supposedly laid off. See, one hand does not know what the other hand is doing. And there is no ability, once you create a massive bureaucracy with entitlement programs, to determine who is worthy of charity and who isn't. So I don't like to see charity programs turned into entitlement programs. Charity programs that are run by individuals in a community or run by churches or whatever. You go back and look at Democracy in America by Alexis de Tocqueville. What he talks about there is, he said, when people in the community saw an issue, they would come together and they would solve it. They would create an institution, an organization, a charity or something, or they would do it through their church. But now we do it. Everything has to be done by government program, and by a government program run out of Washington, where they can't run anything. They can't even fund the government. Agree on how much debt they're going to go into. They're totally bankrupt, but they can't even agree to what the debt level is going to be. And so then at the state level, you get these people sending a check to the dog. They addressed the letter to Michael Ryder, listed the dog's former employer as a restaurant chain in Detroit's Rochester Hills. So our welfare system has literally gone to the dogs because we don't know who needs it. We don't know who's scamming it. We don't even know who Americans are anymore. Here's an example out of Portland, Oregon. Karen Batts, 52, died from hypothermia this last Saturday. She was homeless. They threw her out of her home because she owed $338 in delinquent rent, and she was the second person to freeze to death on Portland streets in 2017. She's 52 years old. The police were called because people said, they reported to the police that a woman was in a parking garage removing her clothes. And they said this is very common for people who are suffering from hypothermia because the victims will frantically remove their clothes even though they're burning to death because it feels like they are burning, like they're on fire. And so this poor lady had been living at a building for seniors and people with disabilities. It was designed to be affordable for people of limited means, but she was thrown out because she was 7 days late with her $338 rent. And yet we give free college tuition for the DACA kids. See, that's what happens when you create entitlement programs and you can't distinguish the people who really need the help from the people who are scamming the system, or even from a dog. We'll be right back. I'm David Knight. Welcome back. I'm David Knight. In the next segment, we're going to be joined by Ford Fisher, who is here in Austin to attend a transhumanist conference. He's also doing a documentary on transhumanism, so we're going to have a very interesting discussion. He'll be here live in studio, and that'll be coming up in the next segment. I want to spend a little bit of time. Of course, yesterday we took your calls about the State of the Union. What did you think about it? And there's some more interesting reactions that have come out, and I think maybe we need to hand out some awards to the mainstream media, some people in the Democrat Party and others, based on their comments here. One of them should go, one of these awards, I don't know, we can come up with a name for the award, clueless, I guess, but MSNBC's Joy Reid, and this is a report that went up yesterday by Paul Joseph Watson, gets onto Twitter and tweets out, church, family, police, military, the national anthem. Trump is trying to call on all the tropes of 1950s era nationalism. The goal of this speech appears to be to force the normalization of Trump on the terms of the bygone era his supporters are nostalgic for. So, yeah, church and family, all those things, that's all gone, right? Because, the enlightened people at MS-13 NBC, people like Melissa Paris Harry has been telling us for years, you got to get over this notion that you got families and that these kids somehow belong to you. Or you have any say so. They belong to the village that Hillary Clinton's been talking about. And, we got to understand that's what's going on. Some people responded as Watson pulls up some of the tweets that people put out. No, Joy, the left is so out of touch, you don't even recognize normal when you see it. And a author and columnist, Joseph Steinberg, said, do you seriously consider church, family, police, military, the national anthem to be terms of a bygone era? We've been telling you that they do for quite some time and giving you examples of it, like Melissa Paris Harry. Harris Perry, Perry Harris, whatever. That woman. And that was a public service announcement by MS-13 NBC. And as another writer comments, Beckett Adams, is she under the impression that the desire for strong families and for robust church communities is some post-World War II phenomenon? Does she not realize that these things aren't exactly unique to Leave It to Beaver? Leave It to Beaver? I can just hear June say, Ward, I'm not worried about the beaver. I'm worried about the Democrats. They're getting us into a lot of trouble. And they're kind of self-destructive of themselves as well. It said millions of Americans enjoyed and advocated for these things long before the 1950s, and they've been enjoying them and fighting for them long since. Absolutely. So so Joy Reid gets some kind of an award. Another award needs to go to the ACLU. The ACLU came out, the American Civil Liberties Union. Remember that, the American Civil Liberties Union, and came out and said, tonight, President Trump said the word America more than 80 times in his speech. Yet, after a divisive first year, we hear and feel how exclusionary America is, says Faiz Shakir, the national political director of the American Civil Liberties Union. Well, just drop the term American from your name. How's that? Because, it's exclusionary. Faiz Shakir feels that America is exclusionary, so just drop it from the name of the organization. And you can hereafter be known as the Civil Liberties Union, CLU, as in clueless, these people at the American Civil Liberties Union. CNN's Jake Tapper, Trump's Americans are dreamers too. Same thing that Nancy Pelosi said. This is the mantra of these people. I would say that it's not an equivalence. They don't see it as an equivalence. They see it as a superiority. And we're told over and over again that these people are better than us. And they're given things to prove that they're better than us. They're given things that Americans are not given, like free tuition in New York State, or out-of-state tuition to whatever state they wish to travel to. But you and I can't do that. Our kids can't do that. CNN Jake's Tapper says, fake Jake says, Trump's Americans are dreamers too. Nancy Pelosi says, yeah, these illegal aliens are dreamers. And you got people on the right, so-called conservatives, who have always been never Trumpers, are telling us that Americans are not as good as immigrants. These are the same advisors who are telling him, advising him on the framework that is going through here. Luis Gutierrez, who was seen running out of the State of the Union address as the other people there were applauding, and some of them were chanting USA, USA. He says he was just on his way to Univision. That would never be any reflection on his disdain for America. And as that was happening, and as I mentioned yesterday, the guy who has for 9 years evaded deportation, because although he came here legally, he then engaged in criminal fraudulent activity and was convicted, and his punishment for that was to have his legal status revoked and to be deported. So he has fought that for 9 years. And he has been the director of a George Soros organization for sanctuary cities in New York City. And he was the guest at the State of the Union. He was the guest of a congresswoman from New York City. And some of the conservatives had wanted the illegals that were invited to the State of the Union, because many of them were invited, just to get into people's face. That's why the congresswoman from New York City invited that guy who has avoided deportation for 9 years, and we had the judge who said, well, he has a right to say goodbye. So I said yesterday, how long does it take him to say goodbye? Now, he's not ever going. And they are going to do this in everybody's face. But they were saying, we want the illegals that have been invited to the State of the Union, we want them arrested. But see, they're not going to enforce the law. Just aren't going to do it. Meanwhile, the liberals were offended not only by the white privilege of Joe Kennedy III. He's a white privileged male. They were offended by that, more so than they were by the slobber on the corners of his mouth, chapstick acquittic that he had going on there. They weren't offended by, as you got the Me Too moment going on, and we've got this long legacy of Kennedys who have kind of a Me Too legacy, don't they? To put it politely. They've got a long Me Too history. But they weren't offended by all of that. They were offended by the fact that he spoke Spanish as part of that. And they said that was condescending to their people, just as it was condescending to have a white male talk to them. And one of the things that he had to say, which I found to be very offensive, was that he was essentially pushing, not only in between his nervous remarks there, he was also pushing every big government program ever. I mean, I guess that's his creds, is that he is full on with socialism for the Democrat Party. But I don't think Joe's got a future. We also see, as I pointed out, the NPR is finally getting on to the memo, and they had a primer for their low information readers. And now the BBC came out and has done yet another 9/11 report. And they keep doing this periodically because the BBC famously pointed out that Building 7 had fallen when it was right over the shoulder of the reporter. And so the people who think 9/11 may be an inside job, reports the BBC. And it starts out by saying, just after the hours after the collapse, a conspiracy theory surfaced online, which now persists for more than 16 years. As I said, immediately after, one guy says, is it just me? Or did anyone else recognize it wasn't an airplane impact that blew up the World Trade Center? And then continuing on, somebody had to have a lot of access to both of these towers and a lot of time to do this. See, that's the essence of the conspiracy. They did lay that out there. Then they go on to say, subsequent investigations made it clear the tower structures were weakened by an inferno. No, actually not. We've had engineers for 9/11 Truth point that out. Many of us have many other times. But where are the lawsuits against the building inspectors? Where are the changes in building codes? Because they'd had buildings hit by planes in the past, and they were supposed to be able to withstand that. Where's the changes in firefighting evidence? And then they get to the real issue, trying to explain at the bottom of it. This is why the BBC keeps coming back. Try to explain why. Not a good explanation. Try to explain why they said Building 7, which was never hit by a plane, collapsed in its footprint. And the reporter said it happened before it did. Welcome back. I'm David Knight, and with me in studio is Ford Fisher. He's an independent videographer, editor, computer scientist, web designer. He's here in Austin for the transhumanist conference that's going on here. And, of course, he's also doing a documentary. We've got a trailer of it here for you about transhumanism. And he's out of Washington, D.C. He's got a site called News to Share. He says it's an engine for independent videographers and citizen journalists. We can talk about that as well, but it's coming out of Washington, D.C. As he said, it's kind of the protest capital of the world. So you can find him at newstoshare.com. Also, you can find him on Twitter at Ford Fisher. That's Fisher with a CH in it. But let's run the trailer first, Ford, and then we'll talk about transhumanism from your perspective. So let's run that trailer for his upcoming documentary. What we have there is a guy that's got a glowing red eye, kind of like Terminator, narrating this for people on radio here. And we've got some people with some massive Look like red
LED
glowing
light
things.
implants.
Yeah.
Yep.
Great big discs glowing red in their hand.
You with my eye. It's supposed to be, you know, a pretty human part of your body.
You took me as a human and added something to it, gave me more function, gave me something I didn't have before. That's what
This is a
really
lady with a prosthetic robotic arm.
Transhumanism as a goal. You're allowed the option where you can do whatever we want and make it more us.
Discover the movement that is implementing the, what does that say? The human body.
That's evolving the human body, and it was showing somebody being microchipped.
Okay.
Now do. The thought is that sometimes it's much easier to do things by something which is attached or implanted in your body than to do something using, you know, a tool.
We're evolving to become something else. So for me, being human is something temporary, and that we shouldn't be afraid to change.
Transhumanism involves the transformation of our biological brain into an electronic vehicle that will have perpetual existence and limitless capabilities.
And here we see a cryogenic warehouse.
Is going to be responsible for some of the very first trillionaires.
So each one of these, because it's still a vacuum, really not full on the outside, is extremely cold inside.
Well, I'm always, it amazes me that this has not caught on more. I just constantly am thinking, why aren't tens of thousands of people doing it?
It's amazing to me, and probably to you, that they would rather die than think about coming back into a world that's really different.
All right, so that was some clips of people talking about transhumanism. Of course, Zoltan Isvan was there. I interviewed him, I think, maybe when he was here before.
Yep, in 2015
maybe for one of
during
these.
his Immortality bus tour, where he was spreading the idea that people should be immortal.
Yeah, well, that's actually an old idea. You know, that's something people have been looking for throughout the history of humanity, and usually they turn to religion, but this is actually turning into religion as well. We've got the Church of Perpetual Life that we saw in there.
Right. So it's fascinating because some of them treat it kind of like a faith. Like there's this idea that I've interviewed many people who feel earnestly that they're never going to die because life extension technology could elongate lifespan faster than they are aging. So someone might be alive today and lifespan is accelerating faster and faster. And then they use cryonics as a backup. The idea that if they'll die, then they could just freeze themselves and wake up at a point at which we have the ability to come back and be cured of whatever killed you in the first place and keep living. So
that involves a lot of trust.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, you got to trust that these people are going to keep the power on. They're going to continually, perpetually do this for a certain period of time. And that they're not going to, if they get to some point in the future where they're able to cure all the diseases or whatever it was that was a problem. Some of these people just preserve their heads, right? Not their entire body.
Right. Some of them just do what they call like a neuro. So it's just freezing the head. And those people generally believe that they're not going to need their human body when they're restored back to life. And then others freeze their entire bodies. Some people also freeze their pets.
Interesting that you say that because, you know, my picture when I saw that, I thought, you know, it involves a lot of trust that somebody's going to keep this thing up for whatever it was that you paid, that they're not going to go through this and just take the money and run, being human nature, okay? And then I thought about it, and I thought, you know, when they get sufficiently advanced, you know, human nature being what it is, you might have some people just bring them back like the scene from, what was the Mars Attacks, right? Where they graft the head onto a chihuahua. So I guess maybe if they get the two different canisters mixed up, you could wind up with something like that, right?
Right. I think their hope is to be kind of as legitimate and optimistic of a business as possible. So the place that I visited was called Alcor, and they actually have a much more advanced process than I might have imagined, right? It's really easy to think of it as we'll just throw a dead body in a freezer. In reality, they're draining out all of the blood. They're putting in a liquid that doesn't freeze. So that theoretically there should be no ice damage to the brain. And of course, the real question is, will there ever be the technology to actually reanimate someone who is currently not living? So the freezing process really isn't the problem. It's not so much the decay. It's, is it ever going to be possible to just bring somebody back to life? And of course, there are large moral, religious, all kinds of implications to that that people try to explore.
Yeah, it gets right down to the essence of what we see man as. I mean, are we simply a machine? a physical machine. I've had this discussion with people who are looking at general artificial intelligence. The idea that if you can accurately reproduce exactly the brain or something that is at least that good or maybe better, is that really going to somehow then attain spontaneously consciousness or something? What does it mean to be conscious? What does it mean to be alive? You know, because something happens at the moment of death that, you know, the body is still there. It is still completely intact, but something is missing. What is that thing that is missing?
Right. So I've interviewed a lot of people, and I've gotten different opinions kind of on all sides. And for me, I'm not actually advocating for one side or another. The point of my film is that I think that we need to start asking these questions now. People kind of see it as science fiction, but people are going through with these processes. So it's worth exploring them and asking about them now. So to the question, it really comes down to what is death, right? And I've asked that question, and people have varied responses to it. So at one point, death was your heart's not beating anymore, or you're not breathing. Of course, now if somebody's not breathing, then they're attached to a defibrillator. There are still efforts to bring somebody back to life, and they may have a meaningful existence. They may still live 20 more years if CPR is performed on them, or whatever the case is. So the definition of death seems to have consistently always been the point at which somebody can't return. Right? Somebody is dead not because their heart has stopped beating, but because they've gotten to a point where their heart will never begin beating again, no matter what you do to them. So now the question is, if you freeze somebody, if there is the potential to reanimate them, the transhumanist or the immortalist would claim that that person isn't dead. So when I visited Alcor, they referred to their the bodies as patients. In their view, they were kind of deanimated or in an in-between state of some kind. If you ask a religious person who believes in some kind of an afterlife, they might tell you that at that moment of death, their soul is somewhere else. So is it conceivable that you could rip them out of heaven and bring them back into their body?
Or if you talk to a probate judge in Florida, he'd tell you that Terry Schiavo, because he doesn't think that she's got a quality of life, that she's not really alive, and we can take off her life support. That's why I have concerns about these cryogenic things and other things. But it's going to be an interesting discussion. Stay with us. We're talking to Ford Fisher. We'll be right back. I'm David Knight. Welcome back. I'm David Knight, and we have in the studio with us Ford Fisher. He is a documentarian. He also has a news site, News to Share. He's out of Washington, D.C., and he's here in Austin because there is a body hacking convention, Body Hacking Con. I think you said it's also referred to as Body Hacks, and that is beginning tomorrow night. Friday night, we'll be going through the weekend. So you can tell us a little bit about that. But mainly, I want to talk a little bit before we get into that about the trailer that we played at the beginning of the interview. Last time we had a couple of interesting individuals there. There was a guy that had a eye that was glowing red, looked like Arnold Schwarzenegger out of the Terminator after he'd gotten hit once or twice. Right. But that was glowing red. And then we had a lady who had a prosthetic arm, robotic arm. Okay, so this lady that had the prosthetic arm, she was born without an arm.
Right, which makes it a little bit different because as opposed to many people who have prosthetics, such as veterans or anybody else who's lost a limb in some way, it's considered restorative to add a new limb. In her case, it is kind of transformative. She's added something that she did not have in the first place. And she would argue that her limbs, her limb, even has a new ability. She's actually able to rotate her wrist 360 degrees, which you or I can't. Mm-hmm. So it lays out a distinction between kind of what we think of as normal medicine, which is usually restorative. We're trying to get back to what we consider a normal level of health, versus in her case, she's adding something new. And that's something that's very significant to transhumanists.
And you know, I think that's a good thing for people to be able to replace missing or destroyed limbs, that type of thing. We see the guy that has the eye, and of course that eye doesn't it's not wired up to his brain in any way to transmit that. He holds a device there that shows what he's seeing, and he can record things, but he can't actually see through that eye. It's just a recording device that he has implanted there.
Right, and so it comes in and out just like a glass eye, but he's able to control it. So in the same way that you would use your nerves to move around your eyeball, he is able to move around and adjust the direction of the eye with his brain. Mm-hmm. But of course, that's correct. He can't see through it. And so that's the fascinating thing about Rob Spence is that he's actually a filmmaker. Mm-hmm. So when he was 9, he had accidentally basically shot his eye out. And then since then was able to use this false eye as one of the eyes in his collection. But it introduces all sorts of questions about, you know, if it was something that became more normal, right? If people had, for example, contact lenses that can film, Google Glass, of course, brought up these questions. It brings up an interesting question about when we're filming all the time, right? If somebody's filming out of their eyeball at any given moment, of course, for him, it's very obvious when he's doing so because he's hooked up to a screen and a laptop. But
and see, that's the
future,
issue with technology.
Could change.
Yeah, technology, once you apply it, and you're talking about, him being able to record other people, that brings up some privacy issues for other people, just as Google Glass does. And when we look at the chip implants that were put in people's hands, and they had some massive ones that were red, it was like that. But typically you don't see them. But once you do that, and we've had Zoltan Isvan here before, and he was talking about how he had that implant, and that would allow him to do away with keys in certain circumstances. It would allow him to perhaps use his implant as an electronic wallet. But then it has, when you look at technology, it has not only privacy issues for other people, but it also has privacy issues for yourself as well. Because by doing that now, he is trackable by any number of people, or he is hackable. Other people can hack into him just like they can an electronic wallet or something. That's a lot of people concerned about that in their phones. It's very easily hacked. So technology has these ancillary issues involved with it beyond just the immediate application choice.
Right. And so those things are probably going to come a lot more into focus in the future. And they're the sorts of conversations actually that we filmed last year at Body Hacks. In the case of Zoltan and most of the RFID chips that go in, right now they're just RFID responders. So essentially all that they have is the ability to respond to some other device that's looking for a code. So it basically just has a unique identifier. Much like a key or just like the chip that you would use to get into your apartment building. Mm-hmm. However, in the future, of course, yes, there could be chips that have GPS tracking, all sorts of questions. And there tends to be an idea within their movement that's very much about personal kind of autonomy, which is to say that you can't, they don't want people to inject something that they're not aware of what kinds of implications there are. So if I'm putting in a chip, they would want to know that somebody can't just hack into that chip. That would be considered kind of a violation of your rights in the same way that it would be if somebody assaulted you, hacked into your body in a literal physical sort of sense. Mm-hmm. So if they're putting in a chip, it's who is able to access this, for what purpose can they do so, and what kinds of signals are going in and out.
Sure, yeah. And so it has privacy issues for us. And again, that would be something as a libertarian that I would go within a mile of, because I don't want to see national identity cards that they're talking about with the border issues here, biometrics put on those national identity cards. To me, that is an easily violated bit of privacy, because we see the government doing that all the time. They get into our computers, they get into our cell phones. We've talked to William Binney. There's absolutely no way that you can make anything like that safe. So that's one aspect of it. But then looking at the other direction, you had an individual we didn't see in the trailer who did some do-it-yourself HIV treatment. And again, that brings up the issues as to whether or not the government can prevent us from taking certain types of medicine or certain types of treatments, especially when we have a situation like HIV or cancer that is life-threatening. They will sit there and say that, no, you cannot have that.
Right. And so that was an interview and demonstration with Tristan Roberts, is the person who has HIV. And the treatment was developed by Aaron Trawick of Ascendance Biomedical. And the issue there is that the government really gets in the way of people who are trying to use their own experimental drug. So in this case, he had to sort of frame it as a research compound. Tristan had to self-inject it in order to sort of sidestep any kind of FDA getting in the way. I did a live stream of it. It ended up being rather controversial, of course, because I'm live streaming an HIV patient self-injecting himself. But the other—
with the treatment, yeah.
Right. The other point of this is that was actually a genetic editing, right? So it was theoretically taking genes that may be immune or able to create an antibody against HIV and inserting that into his body with the hope that he'd be able to create the same antibodies. The FDA, right after there was a story about this on the BBC, released a memo basically telling people beware of DIY gene editing techniques, stay away from them, and basically warning people that even though it's not illegal, that they don't want that to happen. So the view of—
they maintain that's not illegal. I would have thought that they would have said, no, you can't do anything unless—
They're saying it's not illegal, but because they got through the exact kind of, I guess you could say, loophole that prevents it from being criminalized. But of course, the reason that these things aren't tried more is that they're in a legal sketchy area. They're in a gray area. They don't fall under something that can be registered, regulated.
We have an unusual situation in this country because we got, on the one hand, we got the FDA, which says that everything is prohibited unless it's expressly permitted. And then we have the DEA out there that's locking people up for using natural substances and everything. But the idea that, you know, the government on the one hand will tell us that even with informed consent, we can't have certain treatments for cancer or whatever. But then they will also at the same time conduct experiments on people, just as we were talking about a couple of days ago, the EPA running experiments exposing people to diesel exhaust fumes without their informed consent, specifically looking for people who had respiratory or heart issues. So they will, without your informed consent, expose you to stuff, but then they will also try to prevent you with informed consent from getting access to other things. It's a very unusual situation that we have here, and it's a real contradictory situation that our government presents to us.
Right. So I haven't heard of that particular story, but what I will say is that their view tends to be that everything should be consensual, and respecting the right of somebody not to be kind of aggressed upon with some sort of experiment or treatment that they're unaware of goes along with the exact right to participate in whatever you want to. In other words, if you're trying to regulate transhumanism out of existence, or biohacking, or anything that isn't within sort of the FDA biomedical
approved
structure,
thing, yeah, like Laetrile or something. Okay, they would shut down those clinics.
Then you're attaching the same power to do those things without people's consent. So the transhumanist movement is very, very sort of libertarian in that nature, and they kind of have this concept called morphological freedom. To libertarians.
We got to take a break. We'll talk about that when we come back. And I also want to talk to you about evolving beyond humanity. Will we achieve perfection? Will we become gods? Will we have eternal life through technology? We'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm David Knight, and we're talking to Ford Fisher out of Washington, D.C. His website is newstoshare.com. You can find him on Twitter at Ford Fisher. And he is here in Austin to cover the body hacking conference, Body Hacking Con, that will be beginning tomorrow night, go through the weekend. And as we were going to break, you wanted to say one other thing about medical freedom. And then I wanted to talk about this idea of eternal life, the church of perpetual life, and that aspect of it. But let's finish up with the medical stuff.
Right. So, of course, transhumanists tend to believe in this idea of morphological freedom, which as a libertarian, you might be familiar with the non-aggression principle. Basically, it's always wrong to initiate force, fraud, or coercion. You have the right to do what you want with your body. The idea of morphological freedom that most of them have is this idea that you can do whatever you want with your own body in terms of augmentation, that as long as you're not violating the rights of somebody else, you have the right to try to make yourself better in whatever way you want, be it medicine, be it drugs, recreational drugs, physical augmentations, or even seeking immortality, as we're about to get into.
Sure, yeah. And I mean, you know, the flip side of this is we're talking about during the break, you know, the fact that the FDA would prohibit people who are dying from cancer, for example, participating in a study of an experimental drug when their participation could help to accelerate proving whether or not it was effective or ineffective, and they're going to die anyway, and it should be their decision. The same government will also try to attempt to make certain treatments mandatory, like vaccinations or whatever. So, you know, it's an interesting study and contrast that we get from the government. And it all kind of flows out of the idea that they own you and you don't own yourself. And so, yeah, we have a disagreement with the government on that. But let's talk about this idea of perpetual life, because this is kind of turned into a church. And, you know, I think it really does kind of tap into the zeitgeist, this whole transhumanist movement, because we see all the movies about superheroes who have augmented themselves or have superpowers or whatever. That is the dream of the transhumanists, that they're going to come up with hands or eyes or something that are better than what they currently have. Also, the faith in technology, because there's so much faith in technology. And again, it comes to the question of, you know, what is your faith in? And so many people see, I would say, technology as a god. But of course, the foundation of all the religions that we've seen throughout history has been seeking to become like God, his superhuman powers, or to have eternal life. And that seems to come together through transhumanism, this ancient desire to have eternal life and to become like God.
Right. So in a way, it actually is an alternative to religion. And some people have both. So there are Christian transhumanists. There is actually a Mormon transhumanist association, for example. But religion, at its heart, in some cases, tries to basically immortalize somebody by promising them an afterlife. Do these things, and then you'll live forever in sort of a different state. Transhumanists, the ones who identify kind of with that immortality side, the immortalists, would like to believe the same thing, that if you access this kind of technology, then perhaps you'll also have the opportunity to live forever. So I think it goes to a very basic human instinct. And you brought on Zoltan 2 years ago. He argued the same thing with the transhumanist wager as opposed to Pascal's wager, right? So there was the philosophical wager that said, whether God exists or not, you should believe in him so that you can get heaven just in case he exists. Zoltan argued that similarly, you could have the transhumanist wager that perhaps technology is more likely to make you immortal, so you should have faith in that sort of just in case. And I think it's an interesting philosophical dilemma, and I hope to ask that question with my documentary. I've interviewed people kind of on both sides of it. Some people who would argue that that's in some way sacrilegious, anti-human, and some people who believe that it's the opposite, that it's your obligation as a human to move forward with all of the imagination and creativity that we
we look at technology as being the ultimate answer. It is kind of interesting because as we do more and more research and learn more about the human body, it does look more and more like a complex machine within a complex machine within a complex machine down into the subcellular level. And so, when we look at individuals like Darwin, for example, he called the eye a black box. It's an argument that's used by those who support intelligent design. He looked at it and goes, this is incredibly complex. I can't explain how something that complex and interconnected could possibly have just come about by chance random processes. And so as you look at this, as you look at the scientists who discovered DNA, Crick and Watson, they looked at this and said, well, obviously there's intelligent design here, but I'm going to reject out of hand that it could have been God, so I'm going to look for alien life, panspermia or something, which basically just pushes the issue back another level. But they see intelligent design there. And it's kind of an interesting construct here. I think as we look at this and we talk about the evolution of man into this and the solution of technology, I think as we go further and further into this and we try to create not only hands that can rotate 360 degrees, but can also give us tactile feedback and can feel pain or heat or cold or whatever. As we look at this and we start to realize just how complex our bodies are as machines, I think a lot of scientists or a lot of individuals are going to start to look at intelligent design and really kind of wonder where the designer is.
Right. And so it's fascinating because some people face that criticism that they're in some way playing God by accelerating evolution in a way, right? Normally, we think of evolution as kind of a generation by generation process where it's not particularly visible, right? In the timeline that we live in, we have 80-year lifespans, maybe. We don't see much evolution happening in that amount of time. But the transhumanist would say, I can evolve my own body. Instead of editing genes through generations and generations, I can edit my genes in my body right now.
Well, I'm not even saying that. I mean,
technological features as well.
I'm saying that as people start to look for immortality through machines and through technology, and as they start to look deeper and deeper as to how the machine that we call our human body actually works, I think that that's going to make them question the whole concept of evolution. I think they're going to start seeing an intelligent design there. But then that gets to, and we've only got a couple of minutes left here, what is life and death? I mean, what is the difference between a dead body here? What happened to that dead body that is fundamentally different from you and I? Okay, the Christian would answer that there is a soul, there's a consciousness, there's something that is intangible. But what does the materialist say for that?
Right. So as I said before, the theory or the idea that many transhumanists would claim is that the ability to come back, the fact that somebody is viable to at some point be restored, would make them be sort of still alive. The real question that it brings up is what counts as back to life. So if somebody has frozen their head and then is going to be brought back in kind of a robotic form, or maybe they're going to be uploaded into a computer or something like that, it brings up a real question. Maybe that thing looks a lot like the original. Maybe that thing thinks that it's that person, but there's a lot of debate over, is that actually the same person? And it gets to the heart of, is there a soul? Does it matter whether it is biological material? Do we only acknowledge something with organic properties as human, or can a software be a viable human soul for which you could turn off the computer and that would qualify as murder? Right?
Yeah, that's why I want to look at Ray Kurzweil, and he thinks that he's going to upload his body or his consciousness to a machine, and then therefore he's going to propagate himself into eternal life. And you can make an exact copy of yourself, but that's a copy of you. That's not necessarily you. And so then you get right back to that situation there as to what is you. You know, what is the essence of life? What is the definition of death? What is the essence of an individual? Because again, you know, we can see identical twins with essentially the same DNA, but they're very different. And you know, there is something that is essentially different. One of them can die and the other one continues. And so what is that?
Right. So I've interviewed a philosopher actually on this exact question, and we were talking about the transference of somebody's mind into a computer. And we talked about the fact that if it's transferring, theoretically, you're destroying the body, right? But if you were to just copy the mind into the computer, which seems like it would be the same process, nobody would argue that you would have the phenomena of seeing kind of out of the two places, right? It's a copy, not the original. So the difference between transferring and copying is simply the destruction of the original. So at least it's been argued to me by most people that it's more for the benefit of everybody around you. If you want to keep a copy of yourself alive as a form of immortality so that people could continue to ask you questions, your family could continue to kind of enjoy your presence, then there's a goal
Superman's
there.
dad, right?
But the phenomena of dying, right? The actual person, kind of the ghost in the shell, probably disappears at that point, is what I've heard from most people.
Yeah, I think, you know, if you go back and you look at Robert Jastrow and his you know, God and the Astronomers, he says, when all the scientists climb the last rock looking for meaning in life, what they're going to find is a band of theologians. And it gets right back to that original question as a Christian, something that originated with Lucifer in the Garden of Eden or whatever, that you will not die, you will become like God. And that seems to be the motivating factor for every religion. And it seems like transhumanism is becoming a religion with faith and technology as God.
In some cases it can be. It's interesting to note that some transhumanists are religious. Some of them see it as an obligation. If God gave us a property that is to be imaginative and to be the best we can be, then why would one not have the obligation to educate themselves or even augment themselves into the future?
I would definitely agree with you on prosthetics. Certainly we can try to do our best to imitate the greatest designer. Thank you for joining us, Ford Fisher. And again, you can find him at Ford Fisher on Twitter. His website is newstoshare.com.
I'm so excited. The new product at InfoWarsLife.com in a glass bottle, 2-month servings, filled to the brim, filled to the absolute top, the real red pill. This is a heart and brain pill, a nootropic that doesn't have any stimulants in it. But boy, does it stimulate, because it's beyond that. Quite frankly, I just went off what I saw medical doctors prescribing to their patients, but it wasn't prescription, but they were charging people $100, $200 for the formulae. And I came up with our own formula, working with some scientists and developers, non-GMO, made right here in America, 120 capsules. And ladies and gentlemen, you add the pregnenolone to it, which is the precursor to all the hormones that your body has to have to even make the hormones in your glands. It is amazing. Red pill, now available at InfoWarsStore.com, and your purchase funds the operation.